How is everyone doing today? And welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel. We check into great theories, discoveries, and concepts that you are probably not familiar with because they've been suppressed. Things that the powers that be don't want you to know. And this is a segment that's called Your Blind Side. And I generally look at the info war, or at least try to talk about things that I have come across in my own research that might benefit some of the people that are out there, the truthers, and perspectives that they don't have or haven't evidenced, and that perhaps would be coming from their blind side or something that might blindside them. And yeah, so today we're just going to look at a little bit of the work of Mauro Bellino, who was an Italian scholar who used to work at the Vatican as a translator. And he has a few books out that go over some of the Hebrew language in the Old Testament that we kind of translate uh, in a suggestive way. We we generally translate these things with religious overtones, but Bellino is insisting that um, these words need to be translated concretely and um, materially, as in, as in these are like flesh and blood things, or uh, material things, as opposed to religious concepts. And I guess that is, following Occam's razor. Do not resort to a supernatural explanation when there is a natural explanation readily available. And so we're going to read a little bit from toward the end of his Gods of the Bible book. Yahweh was undoubtedly endowed with unique qualities that made him superior to men in power, knowledge, and technology. However, his superior power did not prevent the biblical authors from also accounting for the unpleasant, when not violent, vindictive, manipulative, and even extravagant aspects of Yahweh, from the exterminations carried out in barbaric manners to the need blatantly and repeatedly expressed to be soothed by the smell of burnt flesh. The superiority of Yahweh was always only materialistic and concrete, and was enforced with arrogance and little or no respect for the people who suffered under it. The rules of the covenant he made with his subjects were not the result of negotiations of open discussions between two parties. They were not a compromise between equals. They were rules imposed by the strong party, which the weak party could and should only follow. Um, in examining these rules, it became clear that we were dealing with an individual who had no interests in theological, spiritual, or metaphysical issues, and certainly not in man's freedom of choice. Yahweh's goals were clear. He wanted to make a pact with a population who would serve him in return for his help conquering a settlement area, the Promised Land. And so the Bible presents us with this Elohim named Yahweh. Now, Elohim is plural, a group of dudes, and Yahweh is one of them. The Bible presents us with this Elohim named Yahweh as a member of a group of many other Elohim active in the Near and Middle East stages. Some of the other ones are Baal and Shamash and Ashtoreth. These are all Elohim. He was the one who chose as his personal property the people that were later known as the people of Israel. Study of the relationship between Yahweh and Israel has shown us that Moses, Joshua, and all the people they led were not monotheists, as they were well aware of the actual existence of other Elohim beside Yahweh. The Old Testament also reports on the origins of humanity, which can be traced back to the will of the whole group of Elohim. Two biblical accounts of the creation of man, um, and they may be complementary since they tell us about the same event and how the Elohim, among whom we count Yahweh, formed a new living species according to a collective decision. But this is a very difficult hypothesis for the uh, religious and for scholars to accept. The conditioning to which human civilization has been subjected for millennia is carried out with such determination and tenacity that its pervasiveness manifests itself in results that can be observed daily in the choices individuals make in their goals in life. Human behavior is so precisely controlled that it could almost be described in Pavlovian terms as um, automatic, automatism, automism, uh, automatism. Under certain conditions, the reactions and behavior of Homo sapiens are statistically predictable because we have been conditioned to react in specific ways and constantly steered in predetermined directions. And so um, this occurs in the scholarly world. And but if we can become aware of this, then we might be able to step out into the outside the box area. Um, and the water's warm over here. It's nice. And but stepping back into the box can be treacherous. So we entrust science with the search for truth in all aspects of life without interference. But sometimes even science foregoes this characteristic and takes the form of a religion. Yes, and it's even more nefarious than the religious religions when it does, um, because it goes under the guise of at least pretending to be objective. So, um, and he talks about Darwinism here a little bit and shows one of Darwin's buddies, Alfred Russel Wallace, pointed out that evolutionism is incapable of explaining the origin of Homo sapiens. And that's a crucial part of Bellino's thesis, um, but it is something that the scholarly world doesn't want you to know about. Um, and so he says this aspect becomes evident when scientists, so called, unable to provide evidence, limit themselves by ruling out a priori hypotheses capable of showing ways of investigation that could lead to logical and coherent solutions, but they are not palatable. Uh, and so unorthodox hypotheses are ridiculed and downplayed with sarcastic arrogance and bias. Uh, sounds familiar. And so even though ancient peoples from every continent on Earth have told us that we are the product of children of the stars who came here from other worlds, but that is dismissed so quickly and nonchalantly, um, while the possibility that a spiritual entity, the so called God, of which no one knows anything, but of which many speak assertively when not aggressively, is considered rational and logical. Meanwhile, humanity's lore and ancient tales are full of individuals descending from the sky, coming from other worlds, endowed with incredible powers and abilities, the Bible being just one of many accounts of these encounters. And at the same time, nobody's ever seen God or, um, and so again, the Occam's razor thing is kind of uh, rearing its ugly head. Um, Now, this does not negate the belief in God. It's just talking about Yahweh and the Elohim as not being gods. There, there are two creations in the Bible. One's in Genesis 1 and one is in Genesis 2. And I think that they're separate. The first one is relating to God with a capital G, and the second one is relating to these Elohim. And so, you know, equating these Elohim to just dudes, flesh and blood people, maybe not human, but, just dudes, is not negating the existence of God. That's a different question in my view. So he says we are confronted with two different and opposite hypotheses. The first hypothesis entails individuals from other worlds seen and described by hundreds of people in ancient lore, mythology, and accounts. And the second refers to a God who has never been seen and objectively experienced by anyone. And so, which one of these two hypotheses is more alien to logic and coherence? Um, again, not saying that this is what is the truth, but just in terms of from an Occam's razor standpoint and just from a rational standpoint, um, you know, he's not really even asking you to believe it. He's asking you to consider it. And I think people do a lot of lazy logic, and they slip into these caricatures. Oh, well, what if everybody believed that? And it's like, well, we're not talking about what if everybody believed it. We're talking about what if just one person believed it, you know, because right now nobody believes it. So, you know, that kind of logic of, that's similar to, pre-crime, like getting indicted for crimes that you might commit. Um, so here he goes a little further. Um, so it's necessary to be aware of this behavior and you know get rid of these dogmas. Talks about the Pentagon is now being more open to the UAPs. That's to me neither here nor there. Um, but I guess it's opening the door a little bit for people that in general are closed off to this. Um, it shouldn't have any bearing, but I guess it does. Um, and Okay, now he says, on this ground, we challenge the old theological certainties of the original sin and the consequent damnation that still allegedly burdens humanity. As we have seen, the history of the original sin admits quite different and less dramatic interpretations. Yahweh did not punish Adam for his guilt, he merely expressed what is commonly called sententia post eventum, That is, he acknowledged an inevitable situation resulting from the free choice of Adam and Eve. Removing the concept of original sin is the first fundamental step toward liberation from this sense of guilt with which we are bound and subjugated, and which forces us to live a life characterized by reverent fear and the hope of one day having access to the redemption that will bring us eternal happiness, uh, which I consider to be very childlike ideas, uh, very much along the lines of Santa Claus. You know, the patriots will always tell you that there is no free lunch, but you know, Jesus is the epitome of the free lunch. In this context and in connection with the idea of freeing humanity from guilt and fear, we've also seen how theologians have downright invented the figures of Satan and Lucifer out of whole cloth, because they're not in the Old Testament. When the Elohim moved through space, they had to do so physically because they were not spiritual beings. So they had flying machines, which were called kavod, Kavod in the Hebrew, and ruach, Ruach, which in traditional religious and theological translations are rendered with glory and spirit. So thus we know that when the Bible talks about the spirit of God, it refers to the ruach of the Elohim, one of Yahweh's flying machines. And when the Bible talks about the glory of God, it refers to the kavod of the Elohim, one of Yahweh's flying machines. The kavod, seen as a metaphorical representation of the so called glory of God, is a theological concept with no factual or and textual basis, a purely theoretical elaboration resulting from the desire to forcibly introduce spiritual concepts into a narrative realm where they have no room, since metaphysical concepts were not part of the early Semitic mentality. The glory was something external to God, an instrument that he used to move by commanding it, a means that had deadly consequences for those who had the misfortune to be near it. History of traditional commentators shows the enormous difficulty of understanding and describing the kavod or the ruach in terms of spirituality and transcendence. It's much easier to imagine that those who wrote the text put descriptions of concrete physical phenomena on paper, and these phenomena had been experienced repeatedly by hundreds or thousands of people whose memories must have been handed down over time. And these biblical passages agree remarkably well with the Sumerian accounts and other ancient Near Eastern accounts. Um, okay, so that is just a little bit of a snippet there from Mauro Bolino, but just the general idea of our kind of mental illness that we call religion, where we are constantly trying to impute uh, religious ideas into things that are completely natural and concrete. And if you, he goes over in this book the context of all of the occurrences of these terms, ruach and kavod, and many other Hebrew terms, and generally shows that they are referring to flesh and blood things, uh, you know, materials, and not concepts like glory of God and spirit of God. You know, I'm not denying that those things exist. I'm just saying that this biblical story that's in the Old Testament is not that. It is a story of some dudes named the Elohim that are basically the strongmen that control humanity through their superior powers and demand obedience to them and write them up in legal codes that we mistake for moral codes, but they are actually obedience codes. And that there is no religion going on here. There's just obedience and fealty toward these dudes that they call Elohim, and there's no God involved. The God in the in the Old Testament, only appears in Genesis 1. So that's my take on it, and somebody respond to me and tell me why that's wrong. Um, with some type of, you know, textual or logical, as opposed to emotional, faith-based, because this is a truther channel. We're trying to talk about the truth, uh, and generally the truth uh, requires evidence, facts, um, and not, faith. Uh, so again, as I said in the last video I did, uh, these religious concepts are disqualifying you from calling yourself a truther if they don't have any evidence outside of the Bible to because using the Bible as evidence is really circular reasoning. Anyway, um, like, share, subscribe, and comment, please. Contribute, and remember to watch your blind side.